Go.
Hello, brothers of Chi Phi. I'm Jim Wimberly, class of 1965 at ETA chapter. It's my great pleasure to be here with someone who slightly preceded me in the chapter, Tommy Thompson, class of 1947?
50.
50, okay. I know he was a member of ETA chapter in 1947, however, because I've got the minute book of chapter meetings when he was elected president. And I went through some of the things that were said, and Tommy could tell me exactly who they were and what the circumstances were. And we may come back to that if we have time. But this is a very precious meeting. So Tommy, tell us how old you are today.
I am 95.
Well, you're a young 95.
I'm a young 95.
And he's got on a dog hat. Now, Tommy, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and we haven't rehearsed this, so tell us what's important to you about Chi Phi or what your experiences were.
Well, Jim, I tell you, it was probably the oddest time of the ETA chapter that ever was, because what was made up of members were people like me who had been in World War II and had been overseas and were veterans, and then we had the young group coming in from high school. And this is quite a mixture, because we as older guys kind of knew a lot of different things of how to do it, and the younger kids didn't. But that was a trying time for the chapter, because some of the older guys could set examples that exactly were not good for the young guys. But anyway, it was a great time, but it was a time of, you might say, a lot of things happening to the chapter as it
Well,
was.
let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
My first interruption. Did you overlap any with the greatest bulldog of them all, ETA chapter member Dan McGill?
Oh yeah, Dan and I are distant cousins. My grandfather married a Helen McGill from Hartwell, Georgia. And of course, that goes back to, and I don't know what Dan and I were. We talked quite often when it was at Georgia, but I guess I was maybe a fifth cousin.
All right, let me have a little fun with you. Do you know how many years Dan McGill was a pledge at ETA chapter?
I have no idea.
He's the longest pledge in the history, about 50 years.
Did he ever get to be a member?
We initiated him. I was present roughly 10 years ago, and it's now, what's the date, Robin? July what?
The 16th.
July 16, 2021. My guess is we initiated Dan finally about 2011. So since he pledged in 42, 43, that would be, you add up the years.
Well, Dan was a great guy, a great love, as you well know, of the University of Georgia, and quite a tennis player.
And his wife taught me English at the University of Georgia. She was an English teacher. But go on with your stories now.
Well, anyway, I guess one of the most famous times was the burning of the piano, which you asked me about. And the reason for this was the piano originally was in the living room. And the guys would have dates and come in, and some of the dates could play the piano, and some of the guys could kind of mess around with it a little bit. But anyway, the other people, or the other guys that returned, kind of got tired of this piano playing going when they were trying to play bridge or whatever it might be, poker. And so they kind of got together and said, we're going to take the damn piano downstairs to the passion pit, which we call the downstairs part.
Is that the basement?
Yeah.
We call it the basement.
We call it the passion pit.
Okay.
And,
But it had a dirt floor, didn't it? Or did
no, we had linoleum floors when I was at school.
Okay.
And anyway, so somehow or other that night, because if you recall, getting down those steps to get to the bottom, it was kind of real tight. So they had to take the legs off and then haul the piano downstairs and put the legs back on. Now this all took place after, I'd say midnight after they planned it. So all of a sudden, I come downstairs along with the other brothers, because I was not alpha then, and the piano was downstairs. Well, we said, where's the piano? Downstairs. Okay. So I got down there, and of course, a lot of partying and good times went on down there drinking beer, and it would, unfortunately, a beer can would get set on the top, and maybe some beer would spill in the piano. So all of a sudden, the people said, we are ruining this piano. Got to go back upstairs. So we all kind of said, well, okay. This was done in the chapter room, but we've kind of passed it over, like, okay, yeah, it ought to be done. What happened was, the different crew took those legs off, took it. Next thing we know, the piano was upstairs. Well, I'm not going to drag it out, but this happened about 3 times. And finally, the last time, somebody said, we're going to end this damn thing. We're going to get rid of this piano. Well, nobody paid any attention to it. Next thing we knew, it was about 10 o'clock at night, and somebody hollered, fire! And we looked out, and they had poured gasoline, I guess. I don't know what I had no part of it. But that piano was on fire. And that sucker burned down except for the ivory keys and the wires. All the wood part was gone. So of course, I don't know if you ever recall Judge Rosser, who was
Luther Rosser, certainly.
Yeah. And he said, well, boys, we're going to have to replace the piano. So it so happened that he was going to get up some money from the alumni, and all the alumni says, we're not going to get another piano there, because they'll just burn it. So we never got another piano while I was in school. Maybe they got one later.
Well, let me interrupt you here, Tommy. I pledged Chi Phi in 1961-62.
Yeah.
And the big legend at the Chi Phi house when I pledged was that the Chi Phi's had gotten drunk one night, taken the piano out on the front lawn, set it on fire, and rolled it down Lumpkin Street.
No.
So that didn't happen.
No, sir. It probably got blown up, but it never was burned on the front lawn and pushed down. Because when I saw it, it was on fire. You couldn't have pushed it because you'd gotten burned.
And it was in the Chi Phi living room when it was burned.
No.
Oh,
no.
where was it?
It was out in the back parking lot.
Okay.
That's where it burned.
Okay. And so it was never pushed along while it was burning for what
No.
you saw.
No, I watched it burn, and nobody was pushing it anywhere.
Well, let me tell you how legends can change, because the last time I saw Governor Carl Sanders, did you overlap with him in any way, Carl?
Oh,
Sanders?
yeah, and I knew Carl as a friend.
Yeah. And the last time I saw him, sitting in his office, he said that, at Troutman Sanders, he said that one of his big regrets was that he personally had always been associated with the burning of the piano and rolling it down Lumpkin Street. And as a matter of fact, that's the story I heard.
Yeah.
I heard that, when Carl Sanders was in school, he and the boys got that piano, got drunk, got the piano on fire and rolled it down Lumpkin Street. But now you're
Well,
straight
now,
to do
I don't doubt that, because, the thing is that I actually saw the piano burn, but when it was done in, I would say, my era. Maybe it was another piano, I don't know. But I don't doubt Governor's rendition. It could have very well been, but...
No, he denied that he had anything to do with
Oh,
it.
he did?
He wasn't fessing up to it. He said, I didn't have any, and yet I got the blame all these years.
Yeah, well, that was not Governor's way. He was not that type of guy. He was always a prim and proper type of when I was go up there and visit sometimes during football games, I'd go by the Cowboy House. In fact, one time, I guess the scaredest I've ever been in my life was we had just played Tech and won, and I think his name was Clyde Earhart. But anyway, to me, he was about 8 feet tall. But he came in, I was in the Cowboy House waiting for one of my friends, and he came in the front door, and this was after they played Tech, and he was about half drunk. And he came up and grabbed me by my shirt and said, "Boy, where's Haywood Allen?" Haywood was the president of the Cowboys. And I said, "I don't know." It scared me to death. And he said, "Well, you damn well better find him." I took off. I went upstairs. I went to every room. I went up to the penthouse. I didn't see him. So I came downstairs, but I didn't come all the way down. I stood up there on the landing and I says, "He ain't here."
And did you ever know why he was looking for Hayward Allen?
Yeah, they were all getting together after the game and going to have a big celebration. And it was over, and I think Butts had given them carte blanche to go and enjoy yourself.
Oh, he was a football player, and he wanted
yeah.
Hayward Allen to come party
Yeah,
with.
he was a monster of a man.
Well, tell us about some of the members of the chapter that you knew that are famous. Like Hayward Allen is a very famous name to me. Carl Sanders is. Of course, Dan McGill is. You got any other names you could throw at us?
Well, you mentioned H.B. Troutman, whose daddy was a big lawyer here in town. Story on H.B., Henny-B as we called him. He and I, they used to have every year in the spring, they used to have a little kind of a circus thing. It came down at the bottom of a Lund Canal, right where you went into the field, football field. And anyway, it had a series of junkie type things, but it was something that the guys could do and take their girls do, throw the rope rings out to see if you could win a prize for them and everything else. Well, Henny B and I went down because they had just arrived in Athens, and among everything we found was this guy that was about half soused, and he had a pet bear.
A pet bear?
A pet
How
bear.
big was this thing?
Well, what he did, he advertised you get in the ring with this bear in a fight. The bear had great big gloves, and you had big gloves. I mean, these gloves, they couldn't hurt anything. Well, if you went so many rounds, or 1 or 2 rounds with a bear, you won a prize.
That really happened?
Oh, yeah. So anyway, we got to talk to him. He was about half drunk, and Henry and I said, you know, this would be great if we took this thing up to the Cowboy House.
The bear?
Yeah. So Henry said, well, let's see. So we asked the guy, can we rent the bear from you for about an hour? And he said, oh, I don't know. And the bear's name was Toby. And he said, you know, I don't know, Toby. And I said, well, you know, he's got a muzzle and everything. We just want to take him and show him to some of our friends just up the street here. So he said, okay, I'll let you have him for $20. Well, that was tough times, but Henry and I got up $20 between the two of us and got him on the leash, and we took him up to the Cowboy House.
Weren't you scared of him a little bit?
No, he couldn't hurt you. He was tame as he could be, like a dog.
Okay.
And so anyway, he was a brown bear, not big, but anyway.
How tall would you say?
I'd say he was about 5'2", 3",
okay,
standing up. And anyway, we went up to the house. Well, one of our famous brothers, Barney Bell, who was an ex-Marine man and had quite a thing, was studying for the law, and this was right at the end of the thing, and he had studied that night before a long time. He lived in the penthouse. You remember the penthouse?
I lived there too.
Okay.
A few years later.
Well, anyway, we took the bear up there and we showed him around. Everybody was kind of like this, you know. Somebody said, I bet you Barney would like to see him. So we took the bear upstairs and opened the door, and Barney was asleep on the thing. He'd been up all night long. So we just took the leash off the bear and put him in the room and shut the door. Well, the old bear went over to Barney, and you know, Barney was kind of snoring. So the bear went over there and looked down at him, and just took a paw and put it on Barney's rump. Well, Barney kind of stirred, you know, in the bed there, and his roommate was Walter Calhoun, and Barney says, Walter, if you touch me one more time, I'm gonna knock the hell out of you. Now leave me alone. Well, of course, the old bear, Barney's talking, he's gone. So he reached down and touched again. Barney turned over and said, I told you. And he looked at that bear and it scared him to death. Well, he came out of that bed like he was shot out of a cannon, and it had a table in the middle of the room. So he ran around the table and the bear just followed him. Of course, when Barney got to the door, he came out that door running. Well, we were dialed out. So he got the bear. And we said, well, we tell you, well, HB had Henry had a car. So we took the bear and put him in the car to take him back down. And Henry says, you know, before we do this, we got a little time. And at the end of Lumpkin, I think it was, but anyway, there used to be a bar or beer place up there.
Not Harry's, was it?
I think it was.
Oh, I visited. Now Harry's was a drive-in where you you could either drink in the car or you could go inside and get something. That's right. Yeah.
Well, so we took the bear up there and got out of the car, and right over from where we parked was, and you probably don't know anything about this, but was a 38 Ford with a rumble seat. Well, the rumble seat was open. The top was up. So we were kind of trying to get out of the car and everything, and Toby just went over and saw that rumble seat open. He just went up there and got out and laid down in there.
The bear?
The bear, yeah. So we were getting ready to go over and get the bear out of the car. He didn't have the leash on him. We just didn't have hold of it.
And you didn't know whose car it was, did you?
No, we had no idea. We were going to take the bear in the place. But about that time, these two guys came out, and they were about half sideways, and they were talking and laughing, and they got in the car. Well, they couldn't see Toby because he was laid down. So this guy in his 38 had some straight mufflers on. I mean, straight, no mufflers. Well, when he cranked that thing up, it sounded like the thunder from God. Wow! Well, when he did, Toby jumped up and looked like this. And this guy was getting ready to back up, and he looked up. Toby's face was like this, and he looked. Of course, Toby, it scared him, and he jumped out, and we had but that guy back that round, and headed down. I think that's a Macon Highway that went down that way or something. But the last time we saw him, that thing was making noise and making tracks going. And we never knew. I saw the car around town several times, never to get to see or talk to the guy about it.
Well, Tommy, let me interrupt you just by pointing out one thing. I consider myself, I'm saying you were the participant in the most famous event in Cowboy history there, the burning of the piano. I claim to be a sort of a participant. I'd say it's more like an observer of the second greatest event in Cowboy history. Both of these events are negative, by the way. The so-called Masters ticket scandal that occurred in the spring of 1965. But that's the story. Did you ever hear anything about that? That's a story for another day.
About the guys that counterfeited?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I heard a story about it, but I never did really get all the full.
Well, see, that story has blossomed or expanded just like your story. See?
Yeah.
Now, when you burned the piano, you didn't leave until 1950, the chapter?
Well, I graduated in 49 because I had some GED credits from the Air Force. But because I graduated like at the end of the 49 year, they put me in the class of 50, which was fine with me. But I really was in the class of 49.
Did you ever replace the piano at the time you left?
Not while I was there.
Okay. Now see, the first time I ever entered the Chi-Fi house was somewhere around 1959 or 60.
Yeah.
Because my next door neighbor was a Chi-Fi. But there wasn't any piano there then.
No.
Yeah. You got any other stories like the bear story?
Yeah, one of the most famous stories while I was in school, and it's frightening in a way, but we had a guy by the name of Barton Goose Gause, and he was a Navy pilot and flew Corsairs, the fighter gull-wing Corsairs.
You okay, Robin? Okay.
And so anyway, he was a member of the Naval Reserve, and at that time, which is now Peachtree Cab, was a naval air base. Well, he went down and would get air time to pay him for, to fly the Corsairs. He'd do this about every other weekend. Well, he was going down this weekend, and some of the brothers said, "Goose, we need a little booze," said, "and you can buy some at Atlanta a lot cheaper than we can buy it from a bootleg up here. I'll tell you what we do. How about flying over Athens, and we'll put a big white sheet out on the front lawn. If we need whiskey. If the lawn don't have anything, forget it, we've gotten some." So Goose said, "All right." So he went down and got his Corsair. Now you can believe this or not, Jim, but he flew that Corsair so low over Athens, Georgia, he could use the Georgian Hotel as a pylon. He was not much over 200 feet off the ground, flying around Athens. Well, you can imagine, they had people out on the street, everything going crazy. We had put a white thing out. We thought Goose would fly maybe 1,000 feet or something, because you could see a white sheet. Well, I'll tell you what, that caused more. They had the mayor, the police chief out. I mean, everybody was looking at that airplane about to go crazy. And of course, when they found out who it was, they said, "Well, yeah, you know, he's a Chi-Fi. He's crazy." So, but anyway, Goose, one of the sad things about it, when he landed back in Atlanta, he had flown so low that at one time he had evidently clipped on a tall tree, and clipped some of the top of it off, and it was caught in the air thing. So when he landed, of course, they asked him right away, well, people had the number off of the plane, and so they had him dead to right, and he denied it. They said, "Well, where the hell did you get all this damn leaf and everything?" And so he was, I guess he was given a court-martial. I never really heard what happened. All I know is he was discharged from the Navy.
For flying too low over Athens.
We don't know. He was crazy. I mean, Goose was always a daredevil type guy.
Where was he from? Do you know where he was?
Atlanta.
Okay. And now tell us what high schools you went to.
I went to Boys High, along with a lot of guys. And
now, was that when there was just a boys' high and a girls' high?
Just a boys' high, commercial high, and girls' high. Those were the three high schools in Atlanta. And Boys High probably had one of the greatest reputations and everything. We had all kind of people that had been high up in government and everything. It was quite a thing. It was, I guess you might say, one of the most unique schools that ever was, because our place to go to our schoolrooms were what was called old portables. They were World War I barracks that they had converted into things. Well, they didn't have, all they had was these pot-bellied stoves to heat them. Well, that led to a lot of different things, but anyway, put thing in the stove, it would stink real bad, you know, so you get out of class. And we do guys would do everything. I know one time.
Pranks? You're saying pranks they would do?
Huh?
Pranks? You know, I call them pranks.
Yeah, pranks. But anyway, like one guy, the pencil sharpener was absolutely full with the shavings. He takes a old regular match, diamond match, and sticks it in and cranks it. Well, of course, it caught a while with a teacher who was, we had some of the greatest teachers in the world. He went over and tried to put the thing out and finally got it dead. But I know one time they, to divert, it was going to be a test, and so the trash basket was full and the guy threw a match in there and it cleaned up. Well, the guy slammed his foot down in there. Well, of course, what happened was it got wedged and he was turning around the room. And, it was some wild times.
Well, Tommy, even though you were in the class of 49 or 50,
Yeah.
and I was in the class of 65, we both had run-ins with the same dean of men, William Bill Tate. You
Yeah.
want to tell me anything about Dean Tate?
I probably spent more time in Dean Tate's office when I was alpha than I did in the classroom. A lot of times I'd come out of class and they'd say, please go to Dean Tate. I know one time I had to go there, and this is a good story on the chapter. Several of the guys running low on money decided to make some home brew. So they took a bunch of Coke bottles and made raisins and yeast and everything, put the corks in them and put them downstairs where we used to have a closet for all the athletic stuff. And put the...
Was there a boiler? Was it put in the boiler room?
No, this was, as I remember, it was where the steps came down.
Okay.
And anyway, it just kind of made a little closet. Well, they were doing that, and I knew about it, and I told them, I said, for God's sake, guys, be careful. So the next thing I knew, I had a note from, said, please see Dean Tate immediately. So I went over and I said, what is going on now, Dean? And because I'd be kind of exasperated. I didn't know what the essays or the Phi Delts had done to cause any kind of controversy. So anyway, he said, I understand you got some homebrew over there. And I said, no, Judge, we got any homebrew over here. Well, I didn't have any time to warn anybody, and he said, well, let's go look. So he and I went from his office, walked over to the Cowpie house, and we went around in rooms and everything. Finally he said, well, let's go downstairs. And I said, there ain't nothing down there. That's a passion pit. It's probably everything. And he says, we go downstairs. So I said, okay. So we went, looked around. There was a Coke machine down there we used to chill beer, and very fortunately they had no beer in it. And then finally he saw the closet door for that thing. And he said, well, let's look in here. I said, yeah, well, of course it was dark in there, you couldn't see it. So he said, okay, I don't see it. He said, it must have been a false tale. I'm sorry I bothered you, Mr. Thompson. He said, but I've got to report these things. I said, sure, Dave. So he goes up, and I watched him walk down that long walk going out to Lincoln Street. He had not been gone 10 minutes, Jim, before I was kind of walked down and closed that door, and I heard pop, pop, pop. Those bottles were popping out the cork because they put it in too tight, and here was this home brew rolling out from that closet. And I said, God, we just missed the big man by maybe no more than 5 minutes. Had he turned around and come back in there, he would have caught us. But that was, things like that was always going on. I mean, I never knew. It was a great adventure, but in a way, I think my studies got hurt a little bit because I was too busy explaining what was going on.
Well, tell us, I don't want to miss this. What does it mean to you to be a Cat Fighter?
I guess, Jim, it was one of the highlights of my life. I guess getting married, having kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, all great. But I would have to put the Cowpie and my time that I spent there, the friends that I made, the, I guess you might say, experiences I had, good and bad, have stuck in my mind for a long time. And, you know, just one instance that happens to just pop in my mind right now. We had a guy by the name of Con Robinson from Savannah, Georgia. And he was a great guy, but he had gone into the service late. So he was the oldest guy in the fraternity. And at that time, Con must have been, I guess, 28, 29. Well, none of us were over, maybe 23 or 24. So we called him an old man. But anyway, he somehow or other, he went home to, and an uncle died or something, and left him an old Studebaker. He brought that thing where they had the old-fashioned hubcaps, not the full ones, but just popped on right, that just covered the nuts. And so anyway, some of the fraternity brothers thought the funny thing to do was to fix that car up. And so what they did, they went to the local market and bought some shrimp and took the hubcaps off and put them in there. Well, about 3 days later, Con came in and we were all sitting around and he says, you know, I don't know what the hell is in on my car, but it smells like fish and onion. And he said, I don't know. Well, the thing got so bad, he said, I can't drive it. I just can't drive it. So finally somebody said, well, where do you think it's coming from? He said, I don't know, it's all over. Well, somebody went down and popped one of the hubcaps. Well, when it did, this didn't sit too well from Con, but he could never find it.
Okay, go.
All right, this is part 2 of the interview with Tommy, and I wanted to mention some of the, what I consider to be famous Chi-Phis that may have overlapped some with Tommy. And let me introduce this question by pointing out that rumor was that Carl Sanders and Rankin Smith were roommates, and when Carl was governor, he had the opportunity to be instrumental in bringing a professional football team into Atlanta. And the first person he thought about was his old Chi-Phi roommate, Rankin Smith. And sure enough, around 1965, Rankin bought the Atlanta Falcons, or brought the Atlanta Falcons to Atlanta and remained their owner for many years. Now tell us about Rankin and your knowledge of him.
Well, Rankin was, of course, his family, or the two families, the Sheffields, and Rankin's side of the family, which was the McKeechins, formed the Life Insurance Company of Georgia, and Rankin was a great big part of that, and that kind of helped him in a way become the owner of the Falcons. But I grew up with Rankin, and he and I were probably as good of friends as you could be. Later in life, we fished together, hunted together, and he married a girl from Athens, who my wife that I married later on.
Who was that? What was her name?
I married a Haley.
Okay.
And so anyway, met her at Georgia. And,
You married a Haley?
Yeah.
Any relation to Chenault Haley?
Yeah, first cousin.
Chenault Haley was a good Chi-Phi,
Oh,
and
yeah.
my dermatologist,
Yeah.
his entire life.
My wife's father and Chenault's father were brothers.
Okay.
But anyway, when Rankin acquired the Falcons, of course, I thought, well, man, this is one of the greatest things that ever happened to us. And unfortunately, in my opinion, Rankin was fed some people to help him, because he didn't know anything about owning a professional team. But some people were given to him by Pete Rozelle or other things that just did not fit well, and as a result, it took time for Rankin to try to get things going. Among the things that Rankin tried to sell was the famous coach of, I can't think of his name now. He tried to get him to come down and coach, And,
Not the one at Green Bay, Vince Lombardi.
No, it wasn't Vince, it was the other guy, like Vince, I can't think of his name now, but anyway, he told Rankin he'd come down and coach if he could have a piece of the team, and Rankin said no, because Rankin had already divided up among some of the people who had been competitors with him to get a American franchise, American League franchise, because at that time there were two different leagues. There was the National League, National Football League, and then a new league formed, which was the American League. Well, as a result, Rankin said no.
Yeah, Tommy, I want to interrupt one thing. The people that are watching this film have not had much experience ever talking to a World War II veteran.
Uh-huh.
And since you're a World War II veteran, is any particular incidents in World War II you found memorable that you experienced?
Well, yeah, there was a lot of things that I could recall, but time is limited. And
okay.
The only thing I can say is about that is when I went overseas, I thought the world had come to an end, because here I was, a young kid, had given a pretty good education by the Air Force and keeping things together. I was a flight engineer as well as other things, but they sent me overseas, and I went over there and I was a member of the 9th Air Force, 86th Squadron. And the 9th Air Force had quite a reputation. They had come up through Italy, and they had been one of the main things of bringing, you might say, the war to an end that way, because the English portion of the Air Force was coming from England and in that area and hitting Germany pretty hard and everything, and the 9th was coming up, and they were hitting the oil fields, Police and those other things that were really cutting into Hitler's things. And I guess because I was offered the opportunity to do a lot of things, but I think maybe the things that I remember and things was visiting the Eagle's Nest, which was Hitler's hideout. Now, they would not let us go into the very intricate part of the thing where Hitler had fixed it so it would have been no way, because it was built on the side of a mountain in Stone Mountain granite. And with that, and they also, to give us some indoctrinations, they sent us to a couple of the camps where there had been some torturing done and everything. I didn't go to Dachau or Auschwitz. I didn't go to any of those real bad ones, but I saw some pretty bad things. And I guess one of the...
You mean where Jews and gypsies were kept? Those type camps?
Yeah, and put to death. I mean,
Yeah.
they just dig a great big hole and dump them in there after they went to the gas chamber.
Did you actually see any of the disposed bodies or anything?
No.
Yeah.
All of them had been covered up, or either they had been dug up and then it was back. All that had been taken care of. I think one of the worst things I saw, because there was a DP camp right down from our base, which is displaced person. And these were Poles, French, people who had lost their home and lost everything in life. All they had was a clothes on their back, and there wasn't much of that. Some of them didn't have shoes. They had wrapped their feet in cloth or whatever they could get. But I was given the job of, at that time, the Air Force was going from the old leatherette fleece line type jackets and pants and boots to the new, which was the olive green and of the, I guess you call it, I don't know what kind of material, but anyway, as a result, there was all this stuff that they asked us to turn in, our old flight suits and everything else, and we did, and they took them all up to an area up on it, which was a site for wrecked airplanes and everything, and said, burn them. And I was in charge, and so when I went up there and I looked at it, and I said, why in the name of God would we burn up all this stuff when we got people 2 miles from here that ain't got anything to wear? And then, you know, this doesn't make sense. So we had a major that he wasn't too good of a guy. He was not well liked by me and several others. I think he was a 90-day wonder, but he thought his rank was next to God, you know, so he said, Sergeant Thompson, come over here, let's get this stuff burned. I said, I'm not burning it. He said, you got a direct order to burn this. I said, sir, I can't burn it. And he said, are you denying that I gave you a direct order? I said, I don't know what you call it, but I'm not going to burn this stuff. Well, I was put on report for it, and I had to go before our commanding officer, who happened to be from Mississippi, and I being from Georgia. So he got me to explain what it was, and he said, well, that doesn't excuse you from taking it. He said, but I'm not going to put you on a court-martial. He said, I'm going to reprimand you. And the next time you get a direct order, I don't give a damn who's giving it to you, anything else, you do it. And I said,
So it got burned? It finally got burned?
it got burned, but I didn't do it. And so, but I guess the one other thing that I can remember, that same damn major, we had a situation in which where we were located, there would be a lot of material gathered because the airfield that we were on was Goring's #1 spot. I mean, it had brick buildings, steam, heat. The runway they built, he wanted, it was north-south, east-west, and he wanted to be used 12 months out of the year. Well, we were in an area where it snowed a good bit. He had a steam, whatever you might call it, thing with pipes running under the runway. So they cranked up that steam and melted all the thing. You could fly anytime you wanted to. But anyway, we had a little twin-engine plane that was used by the base and hauled boxes of stuff up to Berlin. So what I understood was these boxes would be turned over to a group that would go through and, you might say, decide what could be used and what was junk. Well, they sent this major up there with us, or excuse me, they sent us up there, but this major happened to be there on another assignment, so he was coming back because he was permanently assigned to our base. Well, he got on, and now bear in mind, this is a little twin-engine Army aircraft, and it had bitch seats, and you know, it wasn't anything, so we didn't get in the air too bad. He said, Sergeant, we got any coffee on board? I said, yes, sir. So we had paper cups, and we had a thermos, big thermos with coffee in it. So I poured him a cup, and then he says, we don't have any cups. I said, no, sir, we don't have any cups. All we got is these. We don't have any ceramic coffee cups. We just have these. So he bitched about that for a while. And then he bitched because it was cold. Anyway, a fellow by the name of Monk was a pilot who I'd got to be good friends with. And I went up to the cockpit and I said, Monk, I'm having a terrible time with this guy. I said, no, you do. And he said, well, just do the best you can. We ain't going to be long. So we got ready to land, and he called me up to the cockpit and he says, we got a little problem. I said, what's that? He said, we got one of the landing gears that won't go down. So we tried everything we could. Go up and dive and try to bounce it out. We tried everything we couldn't get it. There was no way you got that thing. We don't know why it was stuck like it was. But I said, Monk was a damn good pilot. So he said, all right, we're gonna land. Fix that son of a bitch back there so he can't move, and we're gonna go down. So anyway, he made the greatest landing I've ever seen. The right gear was the one that wouldn't go down. Well, when we hit it, of course we landed in the grassy area, but as we went down, as the right wing would get ready to go down, right before it touched, he'd kind of gun that engine and lift that wing up. And he gradually did it, so he got down, and finally the wing drug, and of course grass and everything else up. And I opened the plane up, so when we got there, we were going to get out of it. So we did. I went up to be sure that Monk could get out of his place. I was all right. I got out of mine, and I wasn't really worried about that damn major. I said he can do whatever he wants to. So anyway, I went up there, and Monk and I got out of the plane, and it happened to be sitting right next to a little hut that was kind of an emergency hut where we could use correspondence to talk to planes. And as a result of that, I went there, and one of the guys that was in that hut that day in charge of it, I asked him, I said, you know, we had a major with us. When we were getting out, did you see anything? I said, he had a briefcase and everything. He said, Tommy, I saw that jackass that he was running across this field so fast, said a greyhound couldn't have caught him. And so later on, we went down, and very fortunately, Monk kind of cornered the guy, and he said, I don't know if you'll ever fly with me again, but if you do, I'm going to tell you one thing. You better keep a tight rear end and your mouth shut. He said, because if I have any problems with you, I'm going to throw you out without a parachute. Very fortunate that guy, I guess a couple months later, got transferred out. I never saw him again.
All right, let me ask you this story. This is a great story. I heard Dan McGill speak at the zoning hearing over the new Wi-Fi house at 975 South Milledge. And in that, he talked about his fraternity brother and best friend, Tom Pendergrass.
Tom.
And he also said, I think, that he was on the lawn of the Wi-Fi house playing touch football when it was announced that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And he said, people said, what is Pearl Harbor? Where's Pearl Harbor? But he said that very day, the whole fraternity went and volunteered for the military. You know anything about that or his relationship to Tom Pendergrass?
No, I knew Tom very well. He was also a very good friend of Rankin's. And I played tennis with Tom. He was a good golfer. And as you well know, he was a heck of a baseball player. And he played for the Dogs. But I never heard Tom and all of our chances of being together, and I guess you might say socially going out and things, I never heard him mention anything about his wartime duties.
Okay. I think he became a commodore or an admiral or something.
I think he was a commander in the Navy.
Yeah.
But whatever it was, he did well.
Did you know Coach Bill Hartman, or he in pro football the time you came to Georgia?
No, Bill was a coach when I was there. He coached the punting and kicking teams. And my dad, because Dad was having played both football and baseball at Georgia, he and Bill Hartman were very close. In fact, Daddy would help recruit things. And there were several times, this was before the no-nos of recruiting came about, and I know there were several times that we had young prospects coming to our house and have dinner or things like that. And Bill,
By your house, you mean the Wi-Fi house or something?
no, I mean our home.
In Atlanta?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we would have, from North Fulton or any of the schools that they were looking at a particular guy to recruit, they would get some of the alumni to kind of entertain them. And so anyway.
Did you recruit any of the well-known Georgia players in history?
No, the guys that they usually brought in that mom and dad would take out or whatever they would do, it was kind of something that, well, that didn't really interest me, you know.
Okay.
And they, most of the time we were a little bit older than I was, so I never really got to, I would meet them and you know, I'd get their name, but it wouldn't stick with me. I never.
All right. Well, let's get back to the Chi-Fi house. So any more stories you want to tell us before our time runs out?
Yeah, there was one thing that, quite a thing. There was a poker club formed by Duke McCleskey that I had mentioned to Leo and a couple other guys. But when this poker club was going to play, which they played once a week, and they went in the dining room to do it. And when they did that, the order of the day was nobody made a lot of noise, nobody interfered, nobody went over and looked at a hand and said, my God, you know, otherwise if you went over and around, your mouth was shut and all you could do was just look and see what. But big money, I mean big money, because some of the guys that the thing like Duke had accumulated a pretty good bit of money as a flight lieutenant, and his discharge he got. So he had some jack, and a couple other people. One of the guys that I can remember very well came from a pretty well-to-do family. They bought him a convertible Buick, and he brought to school up there. Well, the betting got so bad one night that he had to put his Buick up for security. Now, it wasn't 100%, but if the game was over and he hadn't reclaimed what he owed in the game, then whoever got that car or that portion of the car, and of course later on they would say, well, his name was John, I can't think of it, but anyway, John was a heavy player. Duke was, and there was a couple of Phi Delts and somebody else. It was
so other fraternities came in and participated.
Well, they were very restricted. I think if I recall, it was a 6-hand table, and that was it.
Okay.
And they played straight poker. They played high-low and everything, but they didn't play deuces wild or jacks or anything like that. It was straight poker. But I mean, you'd see big cash checks hit the table for $150. Well, $150 then to me, man, that was like gold mine. You know, I would sit there and look at that money and I'd think, my God. And big money, and the guy that I'm trying to think of his name, he was a graduate of Georgia and became a right-hand man for Wally Butts. And he was a fanatic about playing poker, and he'd get over there and playing poker.
Wasn't Quentin Lunkin, was it?
Huh?
Quentin Lunkin?
Oh, no. This guy was a little guy. But he traveled with Butts, and I can't think of his name now, but anyway, he'd be in every game, but he didn't have a lot of jack, but he was good at poker, and he sometimes would manage to kind of hang in and win some. Of course, sometimes he'd fold and get out of the game before they got into his hip pocket too deep. But
Robin, can you tell us when we got 5 minutes left on this thing?
Yeah.
How much we got left?
We got like 7 minutes.
Okay, we only got, so we're running out. I don't want to go into a third take. You got any other stories that are real high on your list in the last 7 minutes?
oh, I could go on, I guess, probably half a day of things like the time that the Volkswagen wound up on balcony up on the thing, and how it got up there, nobody knows, but, it got up there.
A Volkswagen
A
ended up
Volkswagen.
on the balcony?
Now, I will have to
Guys?
admit this, Jim, it didn't have an engine in it, but it had 4 tires and everything, and how they got that damn thing from the ground up to that balcony over the front porch, I don't know, but it was up there.
And this day, you don't know how it got up there?
I don't know how it got up there, but somehow or other, a bunch of guys got together and got it down. But it took a heap of them. Now, how they got it up there and when they got it up there, I don't know. At that time, I was not that active with the fraternity. I knew it happened, and I saw guys that witnessed it, but I didn't know, and they would tell me, it's a mystery to this day, who the hell put the thing up there.
All right, let me ask you this, the social life when you were in the chapter and dating and stuff, tell us about your parties or social life in the fraternity.
I guess the party that we had the most trouble with was when we had a Mardi Gras party, and we sent a guy over to South Carolina to buy 190 proof grain alcohol, and he came back with about, I guess, 6 or 8 bottles. But what we planned on doing was we had a big punch bowl that had nothing in it, and in the punch bowl it had the spirits of Peoria, which was grain alcohol. And the thing is, but Cody Smith, who was going to do the mixing, got to sampling along the way, and he got about half drunk, and he wound up putting spirits of Peoria in both things. So what happened that night, we had the band and everything. The first thing you know, we had sorority gals who never had a drink in their life, about half drunk, including Miss Rucker. Miss Rucker, the house mother, got drunk that night, and it was pretty bad. A friend of mine who was an SA, he came and he brought his wife. His wife loved to dance, and I didn't have a date that night, so I took her in to dance. Wellman got into the punch, and the first
Wellman?
Wellman Blaylock.
Oh, Blaylock, okay.
And so anyway, we danced for a good while, and we came back, and he was in the kitchen, standing up like this, at about a 45-degree angle, with his head against the wall and his feet and just hanging down. And he was just dead drunk. And so I told Pat, his wife, I said, Pat, we got to get him home. So we got him home. And anyway, this, to make it brief, that night got so damn wild that we eventually got kicked off the campus for it. And of course, Judge Rosser came to the thing, and he made a famous job. They'll never close the Conifer House, I guarantee you. The next thing I know, there was boards across the front door, and they closed that thing.
Dean Tate did it?
Huh?
Dean Tate did it?
I don't know who did it, but whoever did it, they made sure that house.
So people had been drinking what they thought was just non-alcoholic punch,
Yeah.
and it was full of grain alcohol.
And Pat called me the next morning and says, you got to come up here. They lived in some apartments up on Lumpkin, and I went up there, and Wellman had passed out. He had no cover on. She had taken his clothes off. He was at this angle. His head was down here, his rump was in the air, and his feet were down here, and his rump was as purple as it could be because it was cold. And she said,
But he didn't know it was cold.
we got to do something with him. What did you Cop-Eyes do? And I said, don't blame it on us. Of course, the SAEs jumped on the wagon and said, there was a bunch of SAEs that got bombed that night too. And they wound up sleeping on the couch, and we had to go down the next morning and kick them out and tell them to go back home. But I guess that was what we had. Good parties. Not all of them.
What nights of the week would most of the parties occur?
Oh, it was always on the weekend. Now, during the week, you always had the sorority girls come in with guys they knew, and they would be good bridge games and things like that.
What about meals at the Café House? Tell us about
Oh,
that.
the meals were good. They had they served, and this was part of where the GI Bill went. It was paying for your meals. You could have any of the meals you wanted, breakfast, lunch, or dinner. But when you signed up for them, at the end of the month, you had to pay for the ones whether you made it or not. But the meals were good. I mean, we had a good cook, and the meals were pretty much standard, but they were tasty.
All right, let me ask you, at the parties, nowadays, you may know this, people don't have dates as such. Their boys come and the girls come and they just kind of mingle and hang out. But in your day, I bet everybody had dates.
Yeah, you didn't have girls could just drop by the house unless they had a reason to come there to get something from a boy, you know. But the only way and girls were not allowed on the second floor. Strictly, and that was one of the things about the night of that big party. There was a bunch of gals wound up upstairs, and that was strictly verboten. But anyway, if you saw girls, they were usually with somebody, or maybe another girl that came with a guy. But it was not, that I knew of, there was not anything where gals would drive up in a car and get out and come in. You know, they were usually there because of their date of their friend.
Now, when you had these parties and had bands, did other fraternities come over too, or was it just Chi Phi's and their dates?
No, you would have an intermix of other fraternities that you know, they knew who they had to know in the fraternity to come over and be it. They couldn't just drop in. Not Joe Doe didn't just come over and okay, he just didn't come over to be in the party. But if he knew somebody, or if somebody, like I'd go to the SA house and tell Jack, I said, Jack, come on, we're going to have a party.
Now, that's Jack Davis,
Yeah.
who did the caricatures of everything.
Yeah. And Jack always won the homecoming contest,
Yeah.
because he would do these great big cartoons of whatever the theme was. And of course, as you well know, for a long time he did the billboards with a bulldog on it.
Yeah.
And Jack had quite a talent.
Well, what kind of closing comments? How many minutes we got?
I think it's about right
Or
now.
give us some closing comments at the time.
Well, all I'd say, Jim, is this has been a pleasure for me to sit here and talk to you about days that were quite dear to me, and days that I look back on now, and sometimes I wonder maybe how I made it through it, because there was some tough times, but I did, and I enjoyed being the alpha, even though it was very trying. I know one time I had to go down in the passion pit and take a pistol away from a guy that was about 3/4 drunk, and the pistol was loaded. And there were times like that. There were other times when I would just die laughing at things that would take place. You know, so all in all, it was a great time in my life, a time that I'll never forget, a time that I'll always be willing to share and laugh.
And did you keep up with some of these guys for years and years?
Yeah, Bert Floyd and I stayed pretty close. Jack Davis and I stayed pretty close. And for a while, Charlie Newton, who was a Chi Phi, and he wound up living in Athens. He went to North Fulton and was quite a ball player for them. But those guys I stayed, Charlie McMullen, a great friend, and somebody, I don't know, he might still be alive, but he was a guy that I really enjoyed being with. And over the time, I guess, Jim, that when things kind of faded, going back to the house and not seeing many people that I knew, and a lot of young people that were having fun and enjoying themselves, and I guess I kind of fell out of that. having a family or in-laws that lived in Athens, I'd always go, and my wife and I would go to football games and enjoy it, but we finally got where it was less and less time to go by the Wi-Fi house and things. And I regret that, because I should have stayed in closer contact. But somehow or other, it wasn't the same comfort that I'd had 6 or 8 years before. Times change, people change. But I still, to this day, I really treasure all those memories, Jim. And I appreciate you asking me to relate. I hope the people that look at this enjoy it. And so I guess that for me, I'll say thank you once again.
All right, let's sign off. All right.